Good morning, everyone, or I guess good afternoon, depends on where you're at. This is Curtis Hawks. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer over here at IAMS. And today we're here to talk about a very important topic. The Department of Labor regs went into effect last Tuesday. And so, as I'd mentioned on the call last week, we're going to be doing a series of calls here in the coming weeks. We know there's new information that's coming out, and even in the last week, we have fielded a ton of questions from agents and advisors trying to get their hands around this thing and make sure they're being compliant. And so each week we'll have some new updates on things that we're seeing coming down the pipeline, as well as common questions that we're getting from advisors on here. So in any case, before getting into the main event, I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the additional ways that IAMS is here to support our agents and advisors. One of those is our new producer builders, and you can see up on the screen here that if you're a new agent with us, if you've never worked with us before, we've really got a great program based off of partnering together and producing business to where you can access a variety of different things. And so I would encourage everybody to reach out to a sales director over here. They can chat with you a little bit more about that and how that program works. What I would also mention to you as well is if you're doing something that's working for you really, really well, talk to a sales director. We're all about customizing what we do to the agents and the advisors that we work with. And so, again, it's a great program, and I'd encourage everybody to take advantage of that. Next up, we've got a couple of different things here. One is our referred producer program. And so if you're an agent doing business with us and you like what we're doing and you know somebody that maybe is looking to make a change or isn't quite happy where they're at, send them our way. Not only will you get a $50 bonus when they get contracted, you'll get an additional $100 bonus when they place their first piece of business. And then on an ongoing basis, and these are some of the biggest checks we cut, on an ongoing basis, you'll get revenue based off of their production. You don't have to do anything. We'll take care of the service, make sure that agent's happy, but it's a great way to increase the revenue to your business. In addition to that, we also have marketing reimbursement for annuities, single premium life, traditional life insurance premium, and you can see there that racks up at $100 per 100,000 of annuity production, and then $200 per 100,000 of SPL or 10,000 a target. And so it's really a great way to double the size of your marketing budget, and it's our way to invest additional capital into your business to help it grow. In addition to that, I have to talk about back office support. It's probably not the most exciting thing to talk about traditionally, but I think as we've seen over the course of this pandemic with carriers going to working remote and transitioning to virtual sales and e-applications, those types of things, I think it's really highlighted the importance of having a really good team behind you helping support your business. And so I would tell you we've got some of the best support out there in the industry, from helping design cases to processing business to licensing to you name it. And so I would encourage you, if you haven't written with us before, you haven't tested it out, I would encourage you to do so, because we really do have one of the best teams out there in the industry. In addition to that, as I mentioned, there has been this transition to virtual. And so we do have a variety of e-app platforms available. So we make it really easy for agents to be able to do e-applications. And again, we've got training on it. We've got the platforms on our site, and we've got teams here to help you. If you've not done that before and need some help, they can certainly walk you through how those work and how to take advantage of them. In addition to that, we've got our creative marketing solutions. And I think creative is really the key word here. I think one of the things we've seen over the course of the last year is that some of the things that agents did pre-COVID don't necessarily work or don't work quite the same way in a COVID environment. And so I think that's caused a lot of advisors to have to take a step back and look at, well, I need to get in front of people. I need to generate a consistent flow of prospects. How do I do that? And so because every state, every geographic location is all at different stages of, are they open? Are they shut down? There's all these factors that go into how you should market and what's the best solution for you. And so one of the things that we have actually done is we've gotten very creative with our marketing solutions, and we are running a lot more custom campaigns than we've ever done before. And one of the things that we've implemented is our marketing analysis process. And a lot of our advisors have taken advantage of this service. It's a complimentary service, but essentially what we'll do is we'll drill down into your local geographic area. We'll look at what the population density is, what's going on in the local marketplace. Are there companies coming to town? Are there companies offering pension buyouts? Are there companies shutting down? And we'll look at what your goals are, what your marketing assets are, and we'll put together a customized marketing plan for you. And what you'll see in that marketing plan is different things that we think need to exist within your marketing to generate a consistent flow of prospects. And you can see what the costs are, what the ROIs are, and it provides a lot of clarity in today's environment. And again, because every agent is different and every other country is different, I really think, and we really believe that you need a good plan in order to navigate these waters. In fact, I'm going to launch our first poll here. And what I would offer to everybody is, if you haven't gone through this process before, you can see we've got the poll open. If you'd like to get a complimentary marketing analysis, go ahead and check the yes box, and I can have one of the sales directors reach out to you. It takes about 30 minutes to do the first part of this. They'll take all the information from you, get that over to our marketing department, and they'll normally, as I said, they do a very thorough, in-depth evaluation. So it usually takes a couple of days, and then we'll schedule a follow-up call with you to go through what the results are and what we think might make the most sense for you. So again, it's a great opportunity, and again, what we found is it provides a lot of clarity to the advisor for navigating these waters and identifying, what's the best path for you, because the things that we did before don't quite work the same way as they do now. In any case, now that I've got this up and running, our IAMS website, as I mentioned, again, is a very good resource. You can get current product rates. You can run quotes for annuities, life insurance. You can also do e-applications, both with Firelight as well as iPipeline. And the other thing I would mention to you as well is we've got our sales resource library on there. As we know, we're doing business virtually, and that sales resource library literally has hundreds of different presentations, point of sale pieces that are all unbranded, not carrier specific, that you can use in a virtual or live presentation. So it's a very good resource for the agents. Last, and we're really excited about this, a core aspect of IAMS is we like getting together with our agents and our advisors. We like spending time with them. And so we recently announced our Top Producers Summit, which is going to be a Mediterranean cruise. Qualification period runs through June 30th, actually, of next year. And then at the end of August, beginning of September is when we'll start that trip. But you can see we're going to be taking a Mediterranean cruise, working our way around the boot of Italy. But it's a great opportunity to get together, be with your peers, and we're really excited about it. And so if you got questions on that, you'd like to see some more information on it, certainly feel free to reach out to us, talk to your sales director. But it's going to be just a top-notch concierge level event. We're really excited about getting to go on that with all of our agents. So with that, we'll get into the main event and the core talking points of today's call. So the DOL Fiduciary Rule update. As I'd mentioned, we've got Chris Conroy on the call today, and he's going to be walking us through this. And what I would mention to you as well is we've got a lot of material to cover in a short period of time. And what we'll do is we're going to be fielding some questions that we got over the course of the last week. But if you do have any questions at the end of us, we'll put our phone number out there. And I would encourage you to reach out to us and talk to a sales director who can help you with this. So with that, Chris, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Curtis. And hey, appreciate everybody joining today. We had, I think, a record number, Curtis, last week register for the program, over 800. So over 400 today. So certainly a hot topic. It's in the news. It's in the trades. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a complex rule, and it was very confusing how this was released. And candidly, everyone that we spoke to and everything in the trade suggested that, you know, the Biden administration was going to come in and just kill this thing and just kind of hit the reset button. Much to the surprise of everyone, they did not. So they let that rule take effect last Tuesday. Affects all qualified money, your ERISA plans, also IRAs and IRA recommendations to roll out. And so that's it's broad, very broad and encompassing in the annuity and life world that we operate in, wealth management and securities as well. So today we really want to try to get you the nuts and bolts, and probably more from a lens of the annuity and life world, and ultimately give you some keys to compliance. So when you're working with qualified money, and again, that took effect last Tuesday, so you understand what this rule is and really what the compliance pathway is. I will say, you know, it's a fluid topic. And by that, I mean, carriers are scrambling like crazy. They all thought that this rule would just get killed. The Department of Labor itself has said that, yeah, sometime in the future, they'll issue additional guidance. But, you know, Intel there tells us it's probably not going to come anytime soon. Supervising broker dealers and RIAs are scrambling as well, trying to figure out what they can do. So it's very confusing. I will say first, this is an educational program. It's not intended as legal advice. Even though I'm a general counsel here for the company, Curtis, this is not for your specific legal advice. So, you know, take this, and we believe everything we're saying is absolutely correct. And but, you know, obviously for your unique circumstances, you need to check it out. But moving, and I'll just have you, Curtis, kind of drive forward if you don't mind for me. So go to that next picture with the Department of Labor. And so that's a picture there from in the federal government's Department of Labor. And then actually it's me running around DC doing a little lobbying on behalf of NAFA, where I was the chairman of the board last year and continue to be real involved with that organization. So I will tell you this, I mean, we're real tied into organizations like NAFA, who's also tied in with ACLI, the IRI, SIFMA, NALBA, et cetera. And there is a very concerted, coordinated effort here by the trades to try to influence ultimately what the policy is going to be and the interpretation. So been pleased as IAMS is really an advocate for you. So just know that we're looking out for the independent advisor agents' needs and ultimately your ability to keep selling these great products. You know, this rule has really gone through a couple different versions. And so I think a lot of you who had been in the industry realize there was an Obama rule. There was the 2015 Obama administration proposal. There was actually a proposal even before that in 2010. And we now have really the next iteration, and think of it as like proposal 3 that got turned into a final rule 3.0 in December of 2020. And the Biden Department of Labor has allowed this rule that went into effect February 16th to stand. Much to the surprise, again, of everyone in the industry, especially after the White House Chief of Staff had indicated that you know, all the undersecretaries were supposed to take a look at whether those midnight regulations of the Trump team should stand. And so much surprising. And Curtis, I'm just, because I don't have the slides in front of me here, just make sure you're on the one about the set to take effect February 16. So you see on the left there is the December 18th release. That's the Federal Register. And there's the National Law Review article, Trump-era DOL rules. Will they remain in effect? So again, a lot of people weren't sure about it. Moving on to the next page, you see there, again, Department of Labor picture. And this was an article, I believe, from Investment News, speculating on what's next and how to comply. A lot of confusion. That's the press release there from the Department of Labor. It just came out not that long ago, a week and a half, that would confirm that in fact this is going to take effect, and that they would expect compliance with the rule. So we will talk about what that means. And I will tell you this, the preview is that if you have no new compliance plan, that is not a plan. And indeed, the Department of Labor expects that you have a compliance pathway now, and there's really just one key one to do that we're going to talk about. We'll cover the Fiduciary Rule 2020-02 and also the other pathway 8424. So moving on to the next slide there, the coordination with other rules, and the layout there, the Department of Labor, the SEC, the NEIC, and how does this all work together? And are these duplicative and so forth? Well, they are duplicative. You can think of it that way. Is you have a federal Department of Labor Fiduciary Rule, and that applies to all qualified money. Qualified money, annuities, life insurance, securities, anything that is a tax, an ERISA plan or an IRA is covered by that. And it really applies to everybody, as we'll talk about. It's broad scope. And then you have the SEC rule. Now, the SEC rule, if those who are reps and advisors out there certainly would know, that's the regulation best interest, or Reg BI. And largely that compliance date took effect last summer. I have to talk with some state securities folks that are not SEC registered, and so you might have a different regime in your state to comply with some kind of state best interest. And that applies, to all securities and investment advice. And then the third prong there is the NAIC. So the NAIC rewrote the suitability regulation, and what came out as the best interest regulation. And that was finalized, about this time last year. And now we start to see states adopt that. Arizona, Iowa have, and there's about 20 more states that are rolling that. So that applies to just fixed annuities, fixed and indexed annuities, and really anybody who's selling a fixed annuity. So that covers qualified money, but also non-qualified money. So that's a bit of the oversight of the different think of the different prongs here. And really, unfortunately, you got to jump through all of those depending upon the nature of your license and what kind of money you're working with. But I know we'll also talk about the questions we got about old 8424 and whether that can work. And what we mean by that is, back 5 years ago during the Obama administration, there was a lot of people in the industry scrambled, put together, what was then the 8424 compliance plan. That was different. So that's one key point that a lot of people were confused about. Actually, the Obama administration changed the regulation 8424. And so much of the forms that were created just don't work. They're outdated and they just don't comply with what's the current state of the regulation. So then moving on to that new state best interest slide, Curtis, we have as a resource here through our partnership with NAFA, a great summary of what's going on at the state level with that NAIC revised suitability. And as I mentioned, we got 2 states, 20 on the horizon. We can get you that so you know what the state of affairs are there. And of course, our team is here to make sure you comply with any carrier requirements. So, whether you got a NIGO form or you don't have a NIGO form, and what you really need to do to meet the expectations with that new revised suitability, which is different. To be sure, it is different than the old suitability. So certainly check with us. We can help you on your state's compliance and also any carrier specific requirements. So that kind of sets the stage then to go to the next slide about the DOL Fiduciary Rule, and to talk about that and what this is. And again, we're trying to boil it down as, first and foremost, understand that the fiduciary rule is kind of a catch-all phrase for what is a 300-page rule. and actually a lot of it that precedes that with notice and comment. But ultimately, it's really 2 pieces. So let me try to boil this down. There's 2 pieces to the fiduciary rule. One is the Department of Labor's broad reinterpretation of who is an ERISA fiduciary. Some are calling the preamble's, quote, final interpretation. So as we'll share, they've really broadened the scope of who is an ERISA fiduciary when you're working with qualified plans and IRAs. And that's part one. Part two is they created a new pathway, a PTE, a compliance pathway that we'll share in detail. And so that's the second part. The most important part, I think, of today's presentation is to make sure you know that there's an alternate compliance pathway, and that's the, quote, old 8424, which we've created a compliance form, and we'll go through that here today. So to kind of jump into it, there's really, before this final regulation came out, we had the Obama rule, which got beat in court. And so, just think of it this way. Most people never had to comply with the Department of Labor's fiduciary rules because at the, up until just, this effective date, you had to meet 5 requirements, so-called 5-part test for whether you're a fiduciary or not. And that means you had to give advice on property or securities. You had to do it, second, on a regular basis. Third, you had to have a mutual agreement with the consumer. Fourth, you had to have the advice had to be the primary basis for the plan. And fifth, the advice had to be individualized. So virtually everybody in our annuity and life world didn't meet the 5-part test and never had to have what's called an exemption, a PTE, prohibited transaction exemption. So really it didn't apply. The 5-part test broadly did not apply. And indeed, the court case that threw out the Obama rule, kind of made point of that, as saying, well, largely we don't see how that's going to that applies to most people, at least as what was intended by Congress when they passed the authorizing legislation. So fast forward to 2020 and the Trump administration, ultimately what they put in the rule that came out in December in the Federal Register looked largely like the Obama rule without that real onerous BICE, or what was called best interest contract requirement. And so a lot of the same teeth, the extreme broadness of who is covered under the Obama rule is seen in the Trump version of it, which the Biden administration has let go through. So now we have two administrations that have really permitted this broadened definition of who is a fiduciary. And as we'll talk about, is really everyone, unless there's some very rare circumstance where you might be a one-time exception, which we don't see as really applicable. The other parts of this, so you got the interpretation that broadens the scope of it. And again, I'm trying to boil this down 200 pages into kind of key points, but think of it this way, everyone's really covered. If you're talking to a customer, other than the scenario where maybe you come in one time, you tell the customer, I'm going to meet with you one time to sell an annuity or insurance product, and you'll never see me again because I'm never going to talk to you about it. Which, Curtis, I mean, practically speaking, does anybody do that anymore?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, so that might be a scenario where some he'll say, well, there's the one-time sale thing. That's really the department went into lengths to say even a initial conversation could lead to an ongoing relationship. So not really applicable. And that broad interpretation is a very subjective facts and circumstances type of test, and went into detail to describe, a lot of the people that we work with certainly would be covered because of the nature of the ongoing relationship you have with your clients. So we'll see where all that exactly goes on enforcement, and how aggressive the department will be under the Biden administration. But this new PTE, or compliance pathway, that we're talking about today, keep in mind, is really designed for financial institutions. And there's 4 financial institutions that are approved to kind of oversee each of the salesperson's activities and rules and compensation, et cetera. That includes a bank, an insurance company, an RIA, or a broker dealer. So some of you remember from the Obama rule, there was a lot of focus on the financial institution, or who's the FI. That is a part of this as well. So as you see in the rule, you need to have an overseeing organization. So to date, we in our world, we don't have any insurance companies who have said they're willing to do that, because some of this just came at us really quickly. Whether they could or not, I think is a real question mark, because they can't really oversee independent agents selling to 10 different companies. But we'll see what that becomes of that. But that's kind of that slide summary there. And I know, Curtis, you and I were talking about, you might have had a question about the Biden administration priorities.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most common questions we've gotten over the last week is, what's going on? I thought this was getting delayed. Biden came out saying he was going to delay a bunch of different things. So what do you think caused them to pull back on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think most of the people that are pretty close to this would say, there's just other bigger priorities going on in DC right now. You still got COVID raging. We gotta keep people healthy and safe, and everybody out there, please do so. There's a push for the federal $15 an hour federal minimum wage, OSHA standards, climate change standards. I mean, these are things that are probably bigger Democratic platform ticket items. That said, the kind of going back to the Obama version of the rule was on the Democrats' platform, when they put their candidates up. So I don't know that it was a day one issue, but it might be a day, 200 issue. So we got to keep mindful of that. Talking about, everyone's really covered as a fiduciary now. unless, you know, and that's bullet 3 there, the exception for, quote, non-recurring relationship, which we really think is rare, and that's what most people have said, which is in the oddball situation that maybe you come in and tell the client, I'm going to meet with you today, I'm going to sell you a thing, and you're never going to hear from me again. I'm not going to advise you ever again anything to do with your qualified money. Maybe that's available, but that seems like a fool's errand to try to go that pathway. So then you really have the two compliance pathways, and one is this new Trump administration PTE 2020-02. That's the one that was put in the Federal Register just recently, and then the old, quote, old 8424, which refers to a 1984 regulation that we'll talk about. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Field Assistance Bulletin 2018-02, and what does that mean? So I'll give you the preview. Is, you know, the department has said, well, you know, for now, we'll allow you, if you want to try to comply with the Trump administration's PTE, and again, that's where there's a financial institution looking over your shoulder and so forth, and adhering to all these new standards, as long as you and your financial institution can show good faith compliance with the 3 core components, and you can verify that, then maybe you can use the impartial conduct standards on a temporary basis. That is a one potential pathway, but we're not aware that any significant broker-dealers or RIAs have stated that they're complying with that pathway from a Department of Labor's perspective. Some may comply with the SEC's Reg BI, but this is different. This is, you know, as I mentioned, it's not a safe harbor. It's a different kind of pathway, which will require conflicts, mitigation, a best interest standard, and no misleading statements. And so that pathway really is difficult, if not unavailable to most people. But nonetheless, as the industry gets ready and tries to see if that is a pathway, you know, that's something to keep tuned with your insurance companies out there, whether that's going to be viable or not. So moving on to the next slide, let's go through the core components of the Trump 2020 regulation, the PTE pathway. So again, we have this expanded 5-part fiduciary test that's somewhat vague and really isn't covers everyone that's in the business of advising clients and working with them with their qualified money. And you know, I think you talk about the impartial conduct standards that go along with that, and those are really 3 key things. There's the best interest standard, the reasonable compensation, and no material misleading statements. So thinking about best interest, what does that mean? And the truth is, it's not entirely clear. You know, the department talks about the best interest is, quote, using the care, skill, prudence, and diligence under the circumstances that a prudent person would use based upon the investment objectives, the risk tolerance, the financial circumstances, and the needs of the client. So it sounds a lot like a financial needs analysis. I think it's a higher standard because they use the word prudent. And it kind of refers to the common law of trust and the prudent person standard that has existed for many, many years, and which is a higher standard. It's really putting, it's the highest standard, you know, kind of in the industry, if you will, and requires that, you know, there's a high level of supervision and oversight, and ensuring that you're serving the needs ahead of the client in all cases, and that you have no conflicts that are going to cause you to perhaps violate that duty of prudence. So it's a very, very high standard legally speaking. There are significant consequences, again, if folks were not able to meet these compliance standards, and one of those would be potentially blowing the tax qualified status of the plan, and potentially excise taxes as well. So that best interest standard is really rooted in prudence around loyalty and duty. The second prong of that is reasonable compensation. So, and I think most people say, well, I get paid reasonable. Well, they don't really define exactly what that means, other than they say, well, it depends upon the market rate. So, you know, think if you're advising, you're selling on a commission basis, and, you know, the market rate for your sale you're making is maybe an outlier. Maybe it's out of bounds from what a typical commission is. You know, I think the average commission in the FIA industry is, I don't know, 6.5, something like that, street commission. So if you got something that's significantly outside that range, there needs to be some, quote, neutral factors that would give you a basis to say that is reasonable. And so that could be the complexity of the product, the range of services, ultimately, everything that goes into how much you get paid can that be justified based upon the kind of market rate for product sales. And then third is no material misleading statements. You say, well, I don't do that. So that's really around disclosure. So it's having robust disclosures, and also having no omissions. So maybe not saying something could give rise, as the department said, to having a misleading statement. So a lot of that has to be designed really by a financial institution that can help you understand whether you're meeting impartial conduct. And for most of us in the annuity business, until before the rule took effect, the Department of Labor, no one was a fiduciary. No one really triggered all those hurdles that would give rise to it. So you didn't have to worry about any of this stuff. And so now there's not really a great pathway for most people to even know what those, how would I comply with those impartial conduct standards. But that is a key piece, and the department said, well, we're going to let financial institutions figure it out through the course of the year, and as long as they're doing good faith compliance and overseeing everyone, then perhaps you're okay. So moving on to the next slide. Other parts of it is an acknowledgement that you're a fiduciary in writing. So there is that standard. Having adequate policies and procedures that would again, oversee the activities of all the people out there selling the products, and which probably encompasses some auditing and record keeping, conflict mitigation, and that's another piece of this, which is around, mainly rooted in, are there incentives or differential compensation between the products, similarly situated products, that could give rise to a reason why the advisor is going to, steer business to a certain product, which would be violating their duty of loyalty to the consumer. So, I would say and then have document record keeping, which largely requires, having proper records of the sale and the nature of the conversations, why the recommendation made sense. Those who are with broker dealers today are probably doing that on the security side with Reg BI. Perhaps if you have a supervising broker dealer who supervises FIAs, and although most broker dealers don't supervise MYGA business or life insurance, you might have some record keeping and kind of documentation that meets that standard, but perhaps not, because broker dealers don't generally have to jump through that hoop until just now. And then a retrospective review, which I won't go into detail, but it's basically one of the top officers of your financial institution would need to sign off on doing an audit of the oversight and the compliance procedures. So there's a lot of teeth that go into it. Indeed, I know some of the more respected law firms at DC have commented that this is a very rigorous standard. It's going to require a lot of oversight, and how firms can do it, I think, is going to be a challenge. And certainly they'll look and see if that's a viable solution for compliance going forward. So, if you are with a firm, a broker dealer, an RIA that oversees your annuities and life insurance, they probably oversee some of it. I would recommend you check with them and see if they're doing the Department of Labor's required oversight, all these steps that we're talking about. If they don't know or they're not, then you really don't have that pathway as a compliance path. And again, the department has said that they expect good faith compliance. So that's that rule. I know that's a lot, and frankly, that's kind of condensing a 300-page rule there for us, Curtis. Did you have a question maybe on that?
Well, yeah, that was, I mean, just in looking at that thing, and I know you're going to get into the other pathway, but I mean, really, if you got a choice, why would you use this to comply?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for most people, it just doesn't work right now. And the reason is it's designed really for the securities industry. So again, we kind of kicked off by saying we're going to focus on annuities and life insurance. The reason is most RIAs aren't in the business overseeing insurance. They're not supervising your insurance sales largely. And then even the broker dealers might supervise some of the activities with regard to fixed indexed annuities, but they're not doing necessarily the same oversight as they are with Reg BI. And so even if they were doing that, it's just not quite available. And insurance companies right now, again, everybody thought this rule was going to get bounced by Biden, are not in a position. I haven't heard of one that indicate quite yet that they could even do the Trump 2020 exemption. So I think largely what we're hearing is that the carriers are looking to create the 8424 forms, as we've already done, and have that compliance pathway. And so in there on the left this is an excerpt from the Trump rule. So this is the final interpretation, a couple hundred pages, and then we excerpted a little segment which says, you can still use 8424, and the department clarified that. That was some question mark, and they ultimately say, this may be better suited for people who don't have that natural supervisor who can require all that oversight we're talking about. So on the right there is that's the 8424 compliance pathway that's put in the Federal Register years ago. So, first of all, I guess I say with this before we move on to the next slide is, remember that you are an ERISA fiduciary. So step number one is, they broaden the definition. That doesn't mean you can get out of being an ERISA fiduciary. And that's clarified in that final interpretation that came out. Second, the Department of Labor did confirm that you can use, quote, old 8424, and that there really isn't a supervision component to that. And indeed, the department clarified that might be better suited for people who are in the independent space. And then third, it allows you to earn a commission. I mean, the whole guts of this is that you got to have a compliance path in order to earn a commission. And so they clarified that that could work for annuities and life insurance. So moving on to the next slide, the bullets on 8424 compliance track. So this track, kind of went through the guts of the Trump one, and which is, gosh, it's a lot of onerous requirements and path, steps you got to go through. Largely, this one is a disclosure pathway, and it's, we created a one-page form, and it's really almost as simple as that. You are held to a best interest fiduciary standard, so you got to really put your client's needs first. That's the guts of it. But the form really is the key compliance, which is you need to disclose that I'm an agent for an insurance company, and maybe I am limited. If you were a captive agent, you probably have to jump through some hoops and talk to your carrier about that. But in our world, most are independent agents, work for multiple companies, and we created that form that discloses as such, so that you can make sure you're indicating properly what your authority is. And then second is you got to get paid reasonable comp. And so as we talked about, reasonable comp is market rate, and you need to disclose the percentage. So putting the specific amount of comp down is a requirement first year and succeeding years. And then the last piece is describe any charges, fees, penalties, or adjustments. So how you kind of, you can't imagine all the requirements that go along with disclosures with buying an annuity, premium bonus, recapture charges, surrender charges, market value adjustments. So the best way to handle that is to have a cross-reference really to all the disclosures, and that does work. And then that document needs to be signed by the client, and you keep it in your files. So moving on to that next page, that sample that we've created, just know that, IAMS, we kind of saw this coming we had a little bit of a heads up. We created a compliance form that can be used, and carriers may ultimately, we'll see in coming weeks, months, whatnot, create their own company specific forms. But for now, the rules in effect, you're all fiduciaries on qualified money, and you need to have a compliance track. So we figured we need to get people the information out there, and certainly make them available a sample form that they could use. So this is the sample form we've created. It covers those core elements that are required under the regulation. It needs to be signed by the client, and then you keep it in your files for 6 years. And so we're doing that certainly for our IAMS customers. Makes sense to help our advisors make sure you're staying out of compliance trap. And Curtis, is that something? I know we talk about have to make that available. We can handle the repository storage too.
Yeah, so that's a good point to make, because you do have to house this for, I believe, 6 years. So we do have the capability of making available to our agents kind of that secondary backup to make sure that there's always a file with this. So that way, if you do ever come back and are audited, that you can get a copy of this. So yeah, that's a good point to make.
And we'll see carriers, as we've been talking to them, are working on their 8424 forms. This is all kind of caught them flat-footed. They may or may not NIGO business, not in good order it. We don't know yet. We'll certainly keep you abreast of what those requirements are. But that form is something we created, and again, we'll make available for those folks who are looking for it. And let's move on to the predictions. I know a lot of conversation. Well, what do you think is going to happen with kind of the Biden administration and so forth? Yeah, on the left there, you got the Congress, and you don't have any people running down with barricades and so forth, at least right now. But could there be new legislation that would kind of further advance the Democratic platform and create more requirements by law as opposed to regulation? The answer is yeah. I think that is possible. I think there's a lot that believe COVID and keeping the economy running is just, you got to take over 2021. I'm kind of in that camp. I don't see something happen by legislative act this year, but I think we're keeping tabs on what's going to happen there and whether that would have an impact on ultimately the standard of care for managed people's money. The second thing there is that's a picture of the Department of Labor nominee, Secretary of Labor. That's Marty Walsh. And Marty Walsh is kind of a union guy. You know, he's an old-fashioned labor Dem from Massachusetts, former Boston mayor. He is seen as a progressive, and I think probably he's got to focus more on some of the issues I mentioned. COVID and maybe workplace safety and so forth. $15 minimum hour wages, that kind of stuff. But whether he takes this as a big priority is probably going to come down to his agenda, and also he will have a hand in appointing who would be the undersecretary of the EBSA, Employee Benefits Security Administration. And so ultimately, if that person ends up being somebody focused more on retirement, I guess we could expect probably more, maybe a more onerous future with this rule. And then the third branch there is the U.S. Supreme Court. So you have the prior rule, which again, this one looks very similar to it other than the vice requirement. In that case, ultimately it went to the appellate court and the industry won. So there is a possibility this kind of rule could end up back in the court system. Not sure that would happen right away, but I think to the extent we see more and more requirements that go in here that just make it impossible for the industry to comply, I would say there's a greater chance of that. Next slide I had there, Curtis, is just on our IAMS wealth management. So I want to put a plug in there. We do have our own RIA here. It's IAMS Wealth Management, our affiliate company. Someone said, does this mean I need to go get my 65 license right now? And I would say, nah, the rule doesn't require that. In fact, it says that you need not do that. But I will tell you the trend has been on the regulatory side to certainly favor investment advisors. So if that's something you've been interested in, makes sense for you, does for many, I think from a business standpoint, it makes a ton of sense to be a holistic advisor. We have a home for you here, and it's an insurance and annuity friendly place, and really some turnkey solutions. I would encourage you to reach out to let us know if you want any info on IAMS Wealth Management, because I think it could be a great option, and probably is more in line with where the long-term regulatory trends are headed. So then, I think, Curtis, moving on to the next slide there. I think we had, maybe some questions and wanted to talk about partnership.
Yeah. So we've obviously over the course of the last week talked to several hundred agents, and so we made it a point to kind of compile some of the most common questions that we got. So first one is actually as it pertains to life insurance. So if you're, let's say, funding a life insurance policy with qualified funds, maybe it's RMDs or what have you, how is that viewed? Does that fall underneath this umbrella?
Yeah, good question. The answer does, and the reason is that you'd be advising a client to do something with their qualified money. In this case, if it's take out RMDs and use it to buy a non-qualified life plan, if you're advising them to take action on that qualified money, IRA rollover, take RMDs out to fund life, that would be covered to the extent you're earning any compensation. I suppose if you didn't earn any compensation, that wouldn't be covered, but certainly if you're going to buy a life plan, you would be.
So a follow-up to that question would be then, this rule took effect last Tuesday. What about somebody who maybe did that exact structure? So a couple of years ago, they sold a life policy and that client's funding the policy with RMDs. Does that mean that that policy was sold before the rule took effect? So how does that work?
Yeah, good question. I would say this. I mean, the rule doesn't address that specifically. It's kind of written more for the securities industry. However, to the extent that you are advising that client, like, yeah, let's keep taking those RMDs, even though it was sold pre-rule and it was coming out of qualified money, and it's used ultimately, to have money moved out, and for which you are getting paid is the key thing. Then you are a covered person, and that advice is covered advice. So you would need to jump through one of those exemptions. Again, 8424 seems to be the real viable compliance pathway for virtually everyone. So yes, the short answer is the way I would see it. The extent that you're not getting paid on it, I suppose it's not covered, but if you're getting any compensation, it would be.
Okay. So we talked to a lot of reps here over the last week. What about an advisor who says that they're complying with Reg BI? Is that a safe harbor for compliance with this rule?
Good question. The answer, it is not a safe harbor. The department actually, in their final interpretation, talked about whether compliance with Reg BI or compliance with the Model 275 on the insurance side is, quote, a safe harbor. Meaning, if you just do that, then you don't have to do anything whatsoever. You're done. And they said no. That is not. It's not. We're not going to grant a safe harbor, despite what the industry asked for. I will say, again, if you're with a broker dealer that supervises maybe all of your business, all of your annuities, MIGAs, FIAs, life insurance, none of which I really know of, but let's just say they did, and they told you, yes, we're going to meet the compliance standards, at least on an interim basis of, Reg BI and the Department of Labor's expectations, then in theory, you could use that Trump pathway. But in practice, I don't know of anybody who's prepared to handle it in that fashion.
Okay. Another question that we had come up, which this is a common thing, is commission splits. You have agents that do joint case work, or you have agencies that have sub-agents. Do you have any guidance on that for advisors that are trying to fill out the 8424 form?
Yeah, that one, I would say this. Again, if you're giving advice to a client, then you really need to have an exemption. So if you're speaking to a client, you have some piece of the advice component and you're getting paid, then you're within the scope of this thing. So in this example, let's just say you had, you have a sub agent who's working with you, and maybe they're license only, and you pay them, I don't know, 50% of street, something like that. And both you and the sub agent are, talking to the client. So in that case, you're both getting paid, you're both advising the client, you both need an 8424 exemption. So you need to provide them what you actually earned. It doesn't matter how much was paid by the insurance company. And this sub agent example, that'd be zero. It matters how much the agent actually got paid, in this case from a third party. The other one is like split agents, same kind of thing. I mean, I don't know, it's a 50-50 split. I don't know, maybe some larger agent, you get some 50 points above street, then you need to put down 50% of whatever that level is. So same thing with downlines. Again, it kind of goes to, what exactly did they get paid? And keep in mind, it is to include any third party compensation. So to the extent you're getting paid, like a straight pass through from, a third party, that is to be included as well. And if you were not to do that, then ultimately it's discovered, that could blow your compliance pathway because it'd be an omission.
Okay. The last question that we had is there's obviously a number of agents that are captive or semi-captive. So they might have, a carrier that they represent or maybe a limited pool of carriers. How does that play into this versus an independent agent who can basically go out and get contracted with any insurance company?
Yeah, that's a good one. The department of Labor tried to address that a little bit, but kind of sidestepped the answer really, largely because that was an issue. Is well, what if I have a limited menu of products and I don't have I don't have access to all 500 annuities. I don't have access to every security and alternative investment in the world. How do you actually do this? How do you actually serve best interests when you don't have access to all that? So let's start from the perspective. You're a captive agent who work for one, annuity company. Let's just say, you know, what they talk about is that you can still serve best interests and meet the standards of this rule, assuming you meet all the reasonable comp, best interests, etc. Even if you have just a limited menu, maybe you only have one carrier or you got three carriers or whatnot. But they also say, but you need to know in what circumstances maybe that limited menu is not big enough. It's not a good enough list. And you need to be prepared to walk away from that sale. So I'm not sure in practice how that really works, but they do kind of hedge a bit, say, well, as long as you're still serving the best interest, then you can be okay with the limited menu. The same is true. Actually, this question came from a securities rep who generally didn't sell annuities. They are, in fact, I think the broker dealer restricted their access to most annuities or all annuities. And they said, well, what if a client, their number one need is I want lifetime income. I want to make sure I don't run out of money, or live to 100 years old, and I need guarantees. I want absolute guarantees. Well, I mean, without an annuity product, there really isn't a solution there. That's a guaranteed, lifetime income solution. You put together some laddered bonds, and most of the time, you could structure something that works out, but there's no guarantee. So what happens in that case? You really don't. You have a limited menu, meaning you don't have access to certain lifetime solutions, lifetime income solutions. So there's really not a great answer there. I would say, you can still do it. The department suggests that. I would document the heck out of your file what you talked about, and ultimately you might have to disclose that you are limited. I don't have access to certain things, but I can help you with this, and I think this will work. And make sure you're having a good story, that's kept in a repository, so that you can recollect what happened.
Okay, very good. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and again, what I would tell everybody is we'll be reaching out to you after the call, but any questions that you have, that's all helpful, and we'll address those again on an ongoing basis. So a couple of things here. First off, as we showed a couple slides ago, we've got a PT 8424 form available. So I'm going to launch another poll here. If you're interested in receiving that, we're more than happy to get that out to you. We will have our sales directors reaching out to you because, even as Chris was just discussing, there's a lot of different scenarios that you can come across, and so we want to make sure that if you're going to go through the process of being compliant, making sure that the form is filled out correctly. So shut this down here in a few more moments, but yeah, we want to make sure that it's filled out correctly, because we want to make sure that we're making a good faith effort to comply with everything. So I'm going to close this down here in just a moment, and then have a couple more items that we want to chat about before we wrap up for the day. I realize we're bumping up on the end of the hour, so go ahead and close that down, and then okay. So as I mentioned, we do have a PTE 8424 form available. We'll be following up with you. Secondly, and I know we didn't go cover as in depth the NAIC regs, but what I would tell you is the team over here at IAMS is very well versed on all of these things, so they can answer your questions with the sales team, the new business department, etc. Another thing I would mention to you as well is we're going to be cranking out a lot of information on this in the coming weeks. We know that this is a big change, and so we want to make sure that everybody has everything they need to be able to comply, and that'll be emails, webinars, and then making additional educational resources available. Just in general, what I mentioned to you is as I started the call with, we've got one of the best teams out here. I mean, we've got a best-in-class annuity and life sales team, for that matter, when it comes to recommendation, support, case design, as well as making sure you're compliant with doing business. And in addition to that, also making sure that you're up to speed on everything going on with the carriers and what they're adding and bringing to the table. one great way to see what's going on is I'll put our social media accounts up as well as our YouTube channel. We post a lot of content on there. So, we email, we call, we do a lot of social posts. If you're not following us, these are our accounts, and I would encourage you to follow those because it's one of the best ways to get information in a timely manner. And then lastly, our phone number is 800-255-5055. Chris, you did an amazing job, but I think as everybody's seen as well, it's a lot of material, it's a lot of information. So you give us a call. We're happy to have conversations with you. We're happy to go into specific situations. Chris, I know you're making yourself available to take calls as well if somebody's got a question, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So appreciate the time today, everybody. Appreciate you taking an hour with us, and we look forward to speaking with you. Thanks.
Thank you.